At this point, I arrived with the class of 2000, went through the training program, primarily focused on the space shuttle and the International Space Station, learning those systems. Having launched a couple times on vehicles, you know, the second time was definitely different than the first time. You can feel a little bit guilty of, hey, should I study one more thing, or is there one more piece of information I should get? Am I really prepared or not? So that's definitely different between where I was on my first flight and where I'm at right now. It's been really interesting, I think, for both my wife and I to have gone through the process of seeing each other launch in space. I've seen her take that risk and had it be in front of her, and I've done that to her. And there's just something different about watching a rocket launch when there are people on board. You feel a little bit differently about the pit of your stomach, and I can only tell you it's multiplied significantly when it's somebody that you know, and then somebody, of course, that's a family member. It's even multiplied more.
For me personally, as a spouse, watching everything that Bob has put into this over the last 5 years, the dedication that he's shown, the perseverance is pretty special. For both of us, though, the way our minds work, it won't be until sort of the mission is complete that you have really a chance to savor it and celebrate it. This is a huge accomplishment for an Air Force flight test engineer to be part of the demonstration mission of a brand new vehicle. It's going to be amazing.
Without a partner that has that same appreciation, I think it can be challenging for some folks. There's a lot of work and a lot of time that takes away from family that that my spouse appreciates, and I love her for that. Really, my role on the Demo 2 mission is to make sure that we get this vehicle tested and evaluated so that we can move on to more operational missions at the International Space Station. We've got a lot of objectives on board the vehicle that we need to accomplish to really make sure that it's good to go. We'll make sure all those systems are working during the test flight so that the future missions will have them available even if they don't plan to utilize them. Through years of the NASA team, helping to share that experience and teaching them the lessons that we've learned by going through this. Now there's another capability in the U.S. besides NASA to operate something of this magnitude. When is the last time humans launched on a new vehicle? Certainly on the American side, it's been several decades. Now we're in a time when we've got multiple vehicles under development. It's a great time from a space exploration time frame just to see all that happening, and it's because of this nurturing of the environment, being able to pull in a wider group of people who can contribute towards human spaceflight. It's a super cool time. On a deeply personal level, I'm really excited that my son is going to get a chance to see me launch into space. Being an astronaut has been a little bit of an abstraction thing for him because he's seen me do it in old videos, but he hasn't seen me do it for real. And so I'm excited for him to see this launch. I want to thank the entire Commercial Crew Program team that's worked together to get to this point where we've got vehicles in the launch pad ready to head to the International Space Station.
We're just over 49.5 minutes away from launch of the Falcon 9 carrying Dragon to the space station. Right now, the launch director and the launch team are preparing for a readiness for launch poll. In this poll, the 13 members of the launch team will electronically indicate a go for launch. This is also the go for propellant load. Now, we're going to hear that in a couple of minutes, so while we wait, we are tracking you watching from all over the country. We're seeing large numbers of you logging on or tuning in from coast to coast, as well as around the world. We want to know, is this your first time watching a launch live? If not, how many have you seen before? Tell us using the hashtag LaunchAmerica from your favorite social media website. As for me, this isn't my first one. I've seen a lot, but everyone is exciting. Now coming up, we're going to go into a readiness poll, as I mentioned. Currently right now on other nets, the SpaceX launch director is checking to verify the Dragon team is ready and that the NASA launch management team is ready. They'll come back at about T-minus 47 minutes with instructions to the SpaceX Falcon 9 team to make their final assessments. Then they log into the procedure. It's a little different than the old days where you would hear a go, 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 position by position, all up and down the row. In this electronic age, everybody just clicks on whether they're go or no go. The launch director will then at T-minus 45 minutes summarize the end of the poll and will then provide instructions for the team. At the same time, we will begin getting ready for the crew access arm retraction, and we'll show you that on one of the screens that we've got up. Now currently we are continuing to monitor the weather. The weather is still red. It is improving. We're looking at one cell between the radar and the pad. We're keeping our fingers crossed that conditions will improve, but we're going to be watching that for about another 15 minutes. So it looks like we're going to be good to begin propellant load once we hear the polls, but we still have to get the get the range green so that we can actually do the launch in just 47 minutes from now. Let's listen to the countdown net for a moment. Right now, coming up on 46 minutes, 10 seconds before launch. Didn't hear any significant chatter coming over countdown 1.
Yes, launch director in the countdown net. Poll is complete, and we have a go to proceed with propellant load. Launch control, proceed with swing in the crew arm. Arming crew arm movement for T-minus 45 minutes. Thank you, launch control. A reminder in control room on hold and launch escape protocol. For non-urgent no-go conditions, brief CE or LD, and it will approve aborting the launch auto sequence and proceed to launch abort. For urgent issues affecting the safety of the operation, operator shall call hold on the countdown net. Launch control will abort the launch auto sequence immediately and proceed into the launch abort auto sequence. Operator shall also advise the launch director whether structural breakup or fire is imminent or occurring per Dragon manual escape flight rules. Remainder on fire alarm instructions. Here in Fire Room 4, in the event of a fire alarm, key operators, previously briefed, will remain at their post while the alarm is evaluated. In the event that personal safety is threatened, we will evacuate to the south-facing emergency. Crew access arm retract has started.
And you've heard Mike Taylor, the SpaceX launch director, give instructions to the team. We've also just heard the call. The crew access arm retraction is underway. Great view from the camera inside the White Room as we see the arm moving away from the Dragon capsule, one of the major events necessary to get down to T0. The next one coming up will be arming of the escape system on the Dragon capsule. Now right now, the next plan for Falcon 9, T-minus 35 minutes, we will begin loading propellant onto the first and second stages. Now currently, Falcon 9's looking good, Dragon's looking good. The range continues to be go for launch in terms of the clearance around the launch pad, both the air and the sea space. Looking at the flight corridor, the ground stations, the NASA tracking and data relay satellites are ready to support, and we just continue to monitor the weather. Our team is getting constant updates. We're monitoring weather data sensors around the launch site, looking to make sure that we can get everything into the green position. The one that we're mostly looking at right now is how much rain we're going to get between now and liftoff, whether it's just going to be mild precipitation that's within the rules for loading propellant. That's what the expectation is, but we're going to continue to watch that. So fingers crossed, but right now coming up at T-minus 43 minutes, 18 seconds and counting, everything but the weather's go, and the weather is trending in the right direction. So we've got our fingers crossed here. At this time, we're going to send it back over to Kennedy Space Center as the action is picking up on the launch pad.
Thanks, John I. Now that countdown clock is continuing to tick, and we are 42 minutes and 46 seconds away from launch. Now, as you just saw, the crew arm retracted. That is the last major visual milestone before liftoff. And we should be hearing out on the net soon confirmation that the launch escape system is armed. When that happens, all 8 of the Super Draco throttle valves are opened, which means that those engines can ignite.
For section 7.
Okay. So that means those 8 throttle valves are opened, and if those Super Dracos needed to fire in order for a Dragon to escape off of the pad, they could.
And so things running just a little bit ahead of schedule right now.
Fuel bleed is complete.
Now, we just saw the crew access arm retract just a minute ago. We saw NASA astronauts Doug Hurley.
In 7.2, our visors are closed, and we're arming the launch escape system.
So we just heard the astronauts confirm that they are about to arm the launch escape system. That happens just before fueling begins, which we expect to happen in just a couple of minutes. We saw Bob and Doug suit up a little over 3 hours ago. Then we watched them drive out to Launch Complex 39A. They were assisted by the SpaceX ground team with Crew Dragon ingress. That happened a little before 2 o'clock this afternoon. And then we saw the spacecraft hatch close. And again, just a minute ago, we saw the crew access arm retract. We just heard that the crew armed the launch escape system. And in just a few minutes, we are going to hear the call that they have started propellant loading.
Launch escape system is verified armed.
So we just heard that verification that the launch escape system is armed.
We're switching to GN2.
And we are going to send it over to Hawthorne to take us through prop loading. Jesse?
From the parachutes to the launch escape system, SpaceX has designed Crew Dragon and Falcon 9 to be the safest launch vehicle ever flown. And joining us today, we have SpaceX's Nick Picone, who was our mission manager for our in-flight abort mission earlier this year and currently works on the Starlink team. Thanks for joining us, Nick.
Hey, Jesse. I'm here at the Launch and Landing Recovery Center with the recovery team and our Dragon ground operations team monitoring the launch.
Awesome. Can you tell us more about the critical safety features on this new version of Dragon?
Sure. So Dragon 2 was designed with long-term reuse and reliability in mind. So fundamentally, there are multiple layers of redundancy to any of the failure modes that we could conceive of, that NASA could conceive of when we were working to design and test this vehicle over the past few years. But in the event that we encounter an unforeseen failure mode or multiple failures which push us outside of our design space, Dragon also has backup systems and operational controls intended to keep Bob and Doug safe. I'm sure you've heard a lot about it today, but the launch escape system is the primary backup system that we have from the moment that the vehicle is here on pad being fueled all the way up until orbital insertion. At a high level, the launch escape system, in the event of a major Falcon anomaly or emergency, will terminate Falcon thrust, separate Dragon from Falcon, and it'll use Dragon's 8 Super Draco engines to quickly pull the vehicle away from any kind of Falcon anomaly.
And you talked a lot about the launch escape system. How exactly is that activated? Is it autonomous? Is it manually activated?
Definitely. So for this system to work as designed, you have to remember that the vehicle could be flying at hundreds or thousands of miles an hour through the lower atmosphere. So it's really important that it's extremely fast and highly reliable with very low chance of false positives. The launch escape system fundamentally is set to look at a set of pre-programmed criteria which are on board the vehicle. Dragon and Falcon are looking at high rate telemetry, looking for abnormal vehicle dynamics, loss of communication between critical systems, or manual commanding. Our launch director and chief engineer, who you've heard a lot from today, are capable of sending a manual command to Dragon to initiate a launch escape. and Bob and Doug are also always able to actuate the launch escape handle and initiate a launch escape themselves as well. Now that the system is armed, all of this is currently active on the vehicle.
Wow, it sounds like there's a lot that goes into it. And we did have an in-flight abort test earlier this year to test this out. Can you tell us what we learned from that test?
Definitely. It was possibly the most flight-like test of an orbital class booster in history. It was a fully flight-like test using a full Falcon 9 rocket, which we had to knowingly destroy in order to get this fully integrated system. For folks who didn't get a chance to see it, the vehicle followed a normal crew launch trajectory. About a minute and a half into flight, we had Dragon autonomously trigger the launch escape system based on a reconfiguration of those triggers I was just talking about.
For propellant load.
Thankfully, we had some calm. We continued through flight, had a successful parachute deployment and splashdown, and we did see Falcon rather spectacularly blow up about 10 seconds after separation. It's important to recognize that all of that happens from command to actual separation of the vehicle in under half a second.
Wow, yeah, that sounds amazing. Thank you so much, Nick, for joining us and talking through those details with us. Enjoy the launch today. So we're going to send it back to KSC with Lauren.
Thank you, Jesse. We are about a minute and a half away from propellant load. At T-minus 35 minutes, we should hear the call out on the nets that propellant load has started. So that's about a minute and 13 seconds away.
Hey, Marie and Lauren, I am getting goosebumps over here. It's just an exciting moment. When I was sitting in the vehicle, when we retracted everything, when all the prop was getting loaded up, I was just going through my crew notebook. I was thinking about, what my first step would be if there was a malfunction, because usually everything goes nominally when you fly to space, but you have to think about the things that you have to take care of, the first steps you have to take care of. And on my mission, I was calling out the abort calls, like if we had lost an engine, where would we go next, when the different abort calls around the country and around the world. So I think that's what those guys are probably thinking about now, and just really getting ready for this mission to go off.
Absolutely, and we're just now about 20 seconds from when we expect propellant loading to start. Again, that's fueling of the rocket.
All right, we're getting close. We should hear that call out any second now on the nets. So let's listen in.
Propellant load has started.
Fantastic. So prop load has started. We've started loading liquid oxygen on stage 1 and stage 2. And yeah, liquid oxygen and RP1, which is our rocket grade kerosene. So now that we are 34 minutes and 42 seconds away from the first launch of astronauts into orbit from American soil since 2011, we know that the launch escape system is armed, which happened just before fueling. Dragon prop load happened weeks ago, actually just a few miles down the road at what we call Dragonland. And those propellants, which are MMH, or monomethyl hydrogen, that's our fuel, and NTO, or nitrogen tetroxide, that's our oxidizer, those not only feed the Draco engines that propel Dragon on orbit, but they also supply those 8 Super Draco engines of the launch escape system. So I have one right here, a little model. Oh, it doesn't come off the stand.
Don't break it, Lauren.
All right, I know, it's very nice. So as you can see, the Dragon is actually broken up into 4 quads, and each quad has 2 of the Super Draco engines for a total of 8 of them. And as I mentioned, they are biprop engines. They have MMH and NTO as their oxidizer. Now, most abort systems from past space vehicles, I believe like Soyuz, Mercury, Apollo, they all had a pointy escape tower on top where there was essentially like a mini rocket engine or series of rocket engines on top. And if they weren't used, that escape tower would have to jettison itself from the vehicle. If it was used, it would be used to lift the vehicle off of the rocket. Well, Dragon is a little bit different in that its escape system is actually integrated into the vehicle, and that's great for a couple of reasons. One, one less thing you have to jettison on a nominal flight. And so they're pretty dormant, just those throttle valves open unless they're used, and hopefully they never have to be. And yeah, I mean, the other thing that offers you is the ability to escape from the pad all the way to orbit. Because if you jettisoned your escape system prior to that, you couldn't. So yeah, that's Little Dragon there.
Again, new era, much safer design.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for walking us through that, Lauren. Again, the launch escape system is armed. That protects Bob and Doug so that if something were to go wrong, they can shoot off of the pad away from the rocket and parachute to safety in the ocean. That is such a crucial safety capability. And so now we want to go over to Hawthorne for an operational update with John.
Thanks, Marie. We are counting down those final minutes. Everything is still looking good on the Falcon 9 and the Dragon vehicles for an on-time launch, but weather is trending the wrong way right now, and we're keeping our ears open in case we hear that the weather is going to be no-go for the rest of the count. Right now, we are counting down at T-minus 32 minutes.
Stage 1 locks and
Falcon 9
RP1
did
flow rates
begin
are nominal.
propellant load at T-minus 35 minutes, right on time. The propellants we use on Falcon 9 are a fuel, which is rocket-grade kerosene, also called RP1, refined petroleum. We use an oxidizer, and that's the super chilled liquid oxygen, or LOX as we call it. Those two propellants come together, but they don't light, so we need an ignition source to complete the fire triangle. For this, Falcon 9 uses a fluid called T-tub. You might see that just before first stage ignition, or maybe later in the second stage ignition. You get a green colored flame as the T-tub comes out into the oxygen, and that ignites the main engines right before the rocket takes off or the second stage engine lights. Now currently in the fueling, RP1 fuel is about 10% full on the first stage. That's the bottom 2/3 of the stack of the vehicle you can see on the left. The first stage is that long white cylinder at the bottom, plus that black cylinder called the inner stage. That's the entire first stage that we're loading with LOX and RP1 kerosene. That's the part that comes back to Earth. The second stage just above it, the white cylinder, and then above that will be the Dragon trunk and the capsule. Now currently, the second stage is also loading fuel with RP1. That's about 8% full right now. We are loading liquid oxygen on the first stage. The second stage liquid oxygen load will begin at T-minus 16.5 minutes if the weather cooperates. So LOX loading will then continue on both the first and second stage until the last few minutes of the countdown. Helium loading is also underway into pressure vessels on the second stage. We use that to pressurize the tanks in flight as the propellant is being pulled out by the Merlin turbopumps. Dragon on board the spacecraft. You can see the astronauts are monitoring systems while propellant is loaded into the Falcon 9. Now when we
Stage
flew
1 cryo-helium load
the
has
first
started.
demo flight last year and then the in-flight escape test earlier this year, the sounds inside the Dragon capsule were recorded. So as part of the training, the sounds of the propellant loading were played back to acclimate the crew to what they're experiencing now. I'm listening to some discussion on one of the back nets, trying to track where we are with the weather criteria. We're just passing another weather gate right now, trying to see whether or not the conditions are go. In certain situations, when the weather is no go, you have to wait 30 minutes, and we are now inside of 30 minutes. But if the cloud moves away, if the conditions improve, we may be able to continue the countdown for another 14 minutes and reassess. So we're waiting to see whether or not we can continue the count. Currently we are. The range, they're ready to support with no problems in the air and the sea space area. But again, the weather, that's the one that's looking bad, and we're going to continue to listen. And as a reminder, today we have an instantaneous launch time. So at this point, if we hear a hold for any reason, we're going to have to stand down and target our backup launch opportunity on May 30th.
For Demo 2, Bob and Doug's flight to station will take about 19 hours, and their journey is fairly similar to the trip our cargo Dragon makes back and forth to the International Space Station, with two noticeable differences: docking and splashdown.
As we await T-0 and just a little over 28 minutes from now, ground operations teams just doing those final series of system checks, making sure both Dragon and Falcon 9 are ready for liftoff, and really keeping an eye on that weather. And you're just continuing to get live views of the teams. You've got Falcon 9 and Dragon on your left, and then Bob and Doug on the right as they prepare at the Cape for liftoff.
Once we hit T0 and a successful launch occurs, we will watch Falcon 9 and Dragon make their ascent until Falcon 9 and first and second stages separate and send Dragon on its way to the space station.
And once it gets on orbit, mission operators will prepare Dragon for on-orbit operations, where Dragon will execute a series of burns that are going to gradually raise its orbit to align more closely with the International Space Station. And you're seeing some of that track in the animation on your screen right now. After doing enough of those burns, they'll put Dragon... Oh, sounds like we're going to get a weather update real quick for the crew.
Go ahead, Spacex.
Yeah, we're currently just evaluating a constraint on the field mill rule, which looks at lightning energy dissipation. We expect to have an update at about T-20 and more information there on whether we would be able to continue into the prop load or scrub at that time.
Okay, Jay, thanks for the update. We appreciate it.
Copy. So I'll give you some more words in about 6 minutes.
Okay, so it sounds like we're going to find out in about 6 minutes if we're going to have enough time. And John, I was referring to a couple of those weather situations where we have to have a certain amount of time. In this case, with the field mills, about 15 minutes. So they have until about 16 minutes and 30 seconds to really make sure that we're going to have enough time for that to dissipate. So we're going to be listening for that weather update in just a couple of minutes, but it is going to be a pretty interesting trip uphill for them once they actually get on orbit.
And a very exciting countdown with 6 minutes to figure out if we are launching today. But targeting back to what we were talking about, next Dragon will make its approach and actually dock with the space station. This is a very different process from what we've seen with Dragon cargo deliveries in the past, which used a process called berthing. Now, berthing requires a spacecraft to approach the station and then stop so a crew member can maneuver the station's robotic arm to capture the spacecraft. Docking on this version of Dragon can be done autonomously.
Stage 2 cryo-helium load started.
Autonomously with no crew aboard the station. It's typically a faster process, both when arriving and leaving, but it does still require pinpoint accuracy to approach safely.
Once captured, a spacecraft then gets attached to a common berthing mechanism. It's the same type of port that we use to connect each of the modules together on board station. It's a little bit slower process than docking, but the hatches are significantly larger than docking ports, which makes them perfect for bringing up large cargo items.
And Dragon will spend up to 120 days docked before preparing to return home. Following successful completion of Dragon's test objectives and cargo loading operations, the crew will close out the cabin, perform final system checks, and configure the vehicle for undocking. Once the automated undocking sequence is complete, Dragon will complete 2 departure burns using its Draco engines, pushing it away from the space station.
And then after Dragon departs the station, it's ready for its trip home. And that'll have deorbit entry and landing and a number of other operations. If you're looking at this animation, it might look like we're playing the one we played originally in reverse, because that's kind of how it goes, but just a little bit quicker. All of the operations following the final departure maneuver will include things like trunk separation, closing that nose cone again, executing a deorbit burn, and once they're inside the atmosphere, deploying drogue and then main parachutes, and then finally splashing down off the Florida coast, at which teams will move in, get Bob and Doug up out of the water, and get them out of the capsule once they're on the boat. So we have 4 minutes now until we get that next expected weather update. Let's go down now to the team at Kennedy. Murray?
All right, thanks, Dan. If you're just joining us, we are now T-minus 23 minutes and 48 seconds from the first launch of astronauts to the International Space Station from U.S. soil in 9 years. We're going to find out in less than 4 minutes if the weather looks good for that. And this will mark the beginning of a new era where more people will be able to fly to space than ever before. In fact, we took a poll a little bit earlier to ask you if you had the opportunity to fly to space, would you go? And 86% of those of you watching answered that you would go to space.
That's an incredible number. I think, realizing that you don't have to be a military astronaut or a NASA astronaut to fly in space. You can be a regular just a regular person going up to space on a SpaceX type rocket. So I think that's why the numbers are so high.
Yeah, and we are really thrilled to see all the folks watching along online. I know we certainly hope that that this is a go, but we're going to hear a little bit of a weather update in less than 3 minutes now. And Leland, I know they're waiting for a weather update, and they've come, almost all the way down the count. What do you think Bob and Doug are thinking about right now?
We on SES 129, we were having some weather problems, and I think we were getting close to the countdown, and then it seemed like the sky just cleared up right above our heads. We saw it, and we knew where we were going. And, we always know that, you can have any types of delays, fuel prop delays, all kinds of things that can happen, but we've trained over and over and over again for these types of scenarios. And so, we want to be safe. We want to be safe for our families, and we'll, do this another day if it doesn't work with the weather.
I love that John I. always says weather. It's that thing that everybody talks about, but no one can do anything about it.
I know.
And it is this interesting thing of just, succumbing to Mother Earth. She's going to tell us if we can go or not today.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, if it happens, look at it this way. Bob and Doug got one really great rehearsal in, right?
It's always best to practice and practice and practice, yes.
So again, we're less than 2 minutes now from that weather update that is going to go directly to Bob and Doug, and we will quiet down so we can listen in for that, because I know we can't wait to find out what that is. And those of you watching that have been following along, we are eagerly awaiting to hear whether the weather is going to be a showstopper today.
These clouds can seem really deceiving at times, right? You see the blue skies peeking through and you think everything's fine, but you just don't know. That's why we have those launch weather officers.
Absolutely. And I know, we've talked about it before, but it's not just the weather in Florida that they're looking at. They've got to look at weather downrange. If they were to have an abort in flight and they needed to come down somewhere in the ocean, they need to consider what the weather's like out there, because recovery teams have to go out and get them in a situation like that. So there's so many variables, and that's why not just with this flight, but with every human space flight we've had in the past, there's always a very good chance of a scrub, because you do have so much criteria that you have to meet. And we're going to listen in now. We're just seconds away from a weather update.
Stage 2, RP1 load complete.
That is liquid oxygen you see venting off the rocket. That's completely normal and expected. We're standing by for a weather update.
Unless you can give us another 10 minutes, I don't think we're going to get there with any of the rules today.
I'm going to give you 10 minutes.
I mean, another 10 minutes past T0.
Oh,
1645 local. I think we'll probably be clear on all the rules, but not quite going to make it for this.
Okay. We're going to check back in with you in about 2 minutes, and then I'll call it up at about T-minus 17 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, there's some of them are starting to count down, but we still have one above 2,000. So if that gets below,
And that didn't sound great right there. That was the weather net going out, but we're still standing by for a final decision.
So here's what we're going to do. Marie, why don't you throw it to John
And we're going to continue to listen in for an update, but in the meantime, we're going to go over to John Innsbrucker at SpaceX headquarters in California. John?
And Dragon SpaceX on weather, we're still
T-minus 18 minutes and counting.
LD is
we are still red
some
on weather.
Expect an update from LD.
We're waiting in about another minute for one final check with weather. We're going to check at T-minus 17 minutes possibly. We don't really expect that things will have improved. The weather officer was not optimistic that the weather would clear up that rapidly. We did hear the launch director, Mike Taylor, joke that, you know, if we could move 10 more minutes past the T0, weather conditions may improve, but Mike was not able to do that. We have an instantaneous window today. So at 17 minutes, we want to make that call because shortly after that, we will begin loading liquid oxygen onto the second stage. So if we're not going to have the opportunity to launch, if the clock's going to run out, stand by.
We continue to violate a couple different weather rules that we now do not expect to clear in time to allow for a launch today. We go ahead and end today's launch attempt. Launch control. Go ahead and end the launch auto sequence and proceed into the launch abort auto sequence, please. Launch abort has started.
And Dragon SpaceX, unfortunately, we are not going to launch today. You are go for 5.100 launch scrub.
5.100. It was a good effort by the teams, and we understand, and we'll meet you there.
Copy all.
We've heard the call from the crew. They have been informed. Launch director Mike Taylor has called a scrub for the day, and we got the feedback when the Dragon team informed Bob and Doug. They said we gave it a good try, but they understand, and we are here to try another day. So right now we did officially hold the clock. It looks like at T-minus 16 minutes, 54 seconds. The launch automatic sequence that controls the Falcon 9, the loading of propellants, the cycling of valves, that is also stopped. We now proceed into what is a normal scrub sequence for us. We practice this every launch. So now we move into safely taking the propellants, the pressurization gases back off the first and second stages. As things get into a safe configuration, then we will disarm the escape system on Dragon, and we'll bring the crew access arm back around the spacecraft. So right now, we got down to just inside 17 minutes. The hardware was working very well on both Dragon and spacecraft. We had the fuel loading going on. We had liquid oxygen loading going on, everything but the second stage. And the weather just needed a little bit more time to clear the conditions. We didn't have that time because we had an instantaneous window. And so with that, SpaceX launch director had to call upon the input from weather,
Dragon, copies
had to
all,
call
about 30
a
minutes.
scrub
Thank
for
you,
the
bye.
day per the safety rules that we have for this flight. So right now the team is undergoing the post-scrub operations on both Dragon as well as Falcon 9, working with the range. No issues being reported right now as we start to go through that sequence. Everything looks good. And Dan, we had a good webcast going here until the very end. So you know, we'll look at it as now we've had another great dry rehearsal. Last Saturday we did a dry one, I should say, and today we've done a wet dress rehearsal. But sorry, we just couldn't get there, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, John I. And obviously, we can't control the weather. We came right down to the wire there, hoping we could just squeeze in between those cloud systems to get a launch today, but it wasn't to be. But it doesn't mean we're done. We're going to have another attempt coming up in just 3 days, so we're going to be doing this all over again, essentially, on Saturday, on the 30th, and that launch attempt is going to be coming at 3:22 p.m. Eastern Time, so a little bit earlier in the day. It's going to look largely the same to everything that we saw today, with the crew waking up, going through suit up, making their way to the pad. So we're going to feel a lot of deja vu, I think, on Saturday.
Yep. But still exciting. Safety is always first, so if weather was not there for us today, hopefully Saturday it will be there for us and we will have a safe launch on Saturday.
Yeah, the initial weather report still had us at about, I think, a 40% possibility of violation. So weather a little bit better, but we're still going to be kind of rolling the dice. It is Florida in the spring and summer, so storms are always a possibility. One of the good things, though, the vehicle appeared to be in great health throughout the day, both Dragon and Falcon 9, so we didn't have to scrub for any technical issue. We're going to continue and follow along with Bob and Doug until they're out of that capsule, as again, they had started loading fuel onto the Falcon 9 rocket, so they'll have to wait until all that fuel comes off. They'll disarm the launch escape system, which still stays armed because they're still sitting on a partially loaded rocket, and then once they're able to disarm that launch escape system, the crew arm will swing back out. They'll make their way once again back the way they came, and then it'll be back to crew quarters for Bob and Doug for a few more days. But if you're just now tuning in, wondering why we're not still counting down, we did have a launch scrub today. We were just a little under 17 minutes.
Stage 1 launch and fuel flow rates are nominal for offload. Expecting about a 40-minute offload time.
And so that call out, the LOX, the liquid oxygen fuel pumping out of the first stage of the Falcon 9, everything looking good with that. Expecting about 40 minutes for all that fuel to come off. So again, once that fuel comes off, Bob and Doug will be able to disarm the launch escape system, and that crew access arm will swing back out. They'll be able to make their way back down and then over to crew quarters. So unfortunate scrub today because of weather. That was the one thing we were tracking from the moment we started today, watching Bob and Doug get suited up for their launch. We did abort today's launch, or scrub today's launch, with a little under 17 minutes to go until our T0 time, which was 4:33. So that's going to move us to our next attempt, which is coming up on Saturday, and that time is going to be 3:22 p.m. Eastern time, so a little bit earlier in the day for Bob and Doug and for everybody else watching around the world. They're still going to have a 19-hour flight to station if that's when we launch, and a lot of the stuff that we saw today is going to look very similar, but we're just going to have to try again, cross our fingers, hope for a little bit better weather the next time.
And again, this goes with every launch. We do track everything all the way down to T0 to make sure that everything is go, making sure that the range is go, weather is go. So this is standard procedure. We always tend to make sure that we have a backup day, launch day, in case we do have scrubs like today. So this is pretty normal and standard. Nothing to be worried about. Again, we do this for the safety of our vehicles, as well as today we had astronauts on our vehicle. So even bigger reason for us to make sure that we have safe weather for them to fly.
And just a reminder for everyone still tuned in, it takes about 40 minutes for all of this propellant to come off of the Falcon 9. And while it is offloading that launch escape system on Dragon, which is designed to pull the capsule away if there's any issue with the rocket or anything on the pad, that is still armed. So we're going to continue to stay with this until all the propellant's off, and then we'll see the launch escape system get disarmed. Bob and Doug will be able to open up their visors again. The crew access arm will swing back out and link up with Dragon, and they'll make their way off and then down the tower at the pad. But if you're just now tuning in, no launch today. We did have to scrub because of weather. We're going to be moving to our second attempt on Saturday, just a little bit earlier in the afternoon. Just going to continue to stand by as this propellant comes off. We heard a call that everything was going nominally or as expected so far. And then once all the propellant's off, we should see Bob and Doug make their way out of Dragon shortly after.
And what you're seeing on your screen is a live view of Bob and Doug on the right side inside of Dragon as they're waiting for propellant to be removed from the vehicle so that it is safe for them to disarm the launch escape system. And this will take a bit of time, so we are going to stay live with you to watch this as they exit the vehicle eventually and come down from standing down on launch today.
Up until the point of the scrub, we had a really clean countdown, weren't tracking any issues with Falcon 9 or the Dragon spacecraft, so always a good thing to see. We did have to scrub because of that weather. To be a little bit more specific, we were still in violation of one of the weather criterias. It was the strength of electric fields in the atmosphere that the 45th Space Wing and other weather operators are monitoring around the launch pad. And that's one of those rules where we need a certain amount of time if we're in a violation. In this
are
case,
nominal, roughly 50% on stage 1 locks in fuel, 85% on stage 2 fuel.
So the propellant offload on Falcon 9 continuing to go well. But we needed a little bit more time if we were going to be able to clear that launch weather constraint. And since we do have an instantaneous launch window today, we weren't able to make it. So we hope for better weather coming up on Saturday, where again our next launch attempt is going to be at 3:22 p.m. Eastern time, and we'll be able to go through everything. I mean, we saw them get suited up. They had a great ride out to the pad. All of their initial checks on both the suits with pressure checks and communication checks went well. Able to get the Dragon hatch closed, the launch escape system arm, and Falcon 9 started its fueling. Just not able to make a good weather window today.
And as John I said earlier, it was just another great rehearsal today. I don't think you can get enough practice doing this. So when Saturday comes, or when the day that we can actually launch the vehicle, Bob and Doug and the NASA and SpaceX team are fully prepared with just an extra rehearsal on the belt now.
Yeah, as we had talked a couple of times throughout our countdown, the weather is a lot more complex when we're launching humans. You have some more stringent requirements in place, not only around the pad, but in the case of this launch today, we were also looking at whether the entire ascent corridor, as we call it, so basically the entire way that they were flying up the east coast of the United States in this launch today, we're monitoring that weather because those are areas that if they have an ascent abort, or basically Dragon firing off of the Falcon 9 while they're flying into space, we have to make sure that conditions are good in the sea states around those areas, just so they're not going to be landing in the middle of a hurricane, which we did have a tropical storm forming right off the coast of South Carolina today, just to help complicate things a little bit.
And people might be asking, if we knew the weather was going to be a little iffy today, why continue to count down? Well, that is the reason why we do all these checks all the way to countdown. In Florida, the weather is, pretty sporadic. Sometimes a thunderstorm or hurricane will pass through. Within 20 minutes, it's gone, and we could have clear skies for a safe launch. We continued as scheduled, standard procedure again, to just continue to monitor weather all the way down to the last minutes of the count, and we see what happens. So today, unfortunately, we did scrub for weather, but we will attempt again this Saturday on May 30th.
And Dan, Jesse, a couple of things to add on there. Right now we are 11 minutes after the scrub was called. Liquid oxygen and fuel are coming off of the first stage. Hard to tell from the view. It's still a little misty around the tank. Fuel tank is offloading. That's going slower, but it's also a smaller tank. It doesn't take very long to either load it or to offload it. The other thing that we're working on is the high pressure helium spheres, as well as the nitrogen spheres for the landing leg system. The pressure will be brought down on those, eventually getting it down low enough to where people can re-enter the pad area. So right now the team is preparing, once they get a permission, the SpaceX ingress-egress technician team will come back inside the caution area around the pad, make their way up when conditions are right, open up the hatch and assist the astronauts out of the Dragon. I'd like to point out that for those who are wondering whether or not, having gone through this, putting propellant, pressurization gases on, getting fairly close to launch, whether that has done anything to wear out the Falcon 9 or the Dragon, the answer is no. If you can recall, the Falcon 9's designed for at least 10 flights, and about time we get up to a 10th flight, we'll be doing testing to find that we probably got enough margin to continue keep flying. So this is the very first flight of a new first stage and a new second stage. So we haven't even gotten through the first flight, and in all of our margin calculations, we also take into account the fact that we may scrub a launch. So even today's operation, where we have pressurized and we have stressed the vehicle a little bit, that's taken into account in our design and our qualification testing. The other good thing is that the most stressing part of the flight for the Falcon 9 on the first stage is the re-entry. So we didn't even get through that. So we're sitting here on the pad. It's a fairly straightforward situation and not stressing on the Falcon 9. And on the Dragon spacecraft, with the human rating factors to carry crew, there is enough factors of safety, margins of safety, redundancy, that just having 2 people on board and closing the hatch and even pressurizing the propellant system does not eat into the margins of
offloads continue nominally 30% on stage 1
so
launch.
right now everything's continuing to
stage
offload. The automatic sequences that we use routinely, both at the launch sites, Kennedy Space Center, Cape Canaveral, even Vandenberg Air Force Base, as well as in our Texas test site for first and second stage. Those sequences are running. Propellant is coming off of the vehicle per plan. And we see Bob and Doug up in the Dragon spacecraft, just waiting when we can get up there, open the hatch, and help them egress and come on back down the tower. And the other thought I had, Dan and Jesse, is right now we are coming up on what would have been T0. And I'm wondering 10 minutes from now whether the weather officer would turn around and say, yes, it turned good. You just didn't have a long enough window. We only had 1 second and we needed 10 minutes. So we'll have to ask offline and say, hey, did the weather conditions improve? And one thing I'll tag on to that Dan was mentioning and Jesse was talking about, the launch opportunities. The launch window does move earlier on Saturday a little bit. So it just happened to be Orbital Dynamics said today, if you want to go to the International Space Station and you want to launch northeast, which is the approved trajectory, you have to go right at 4:35 p.m. Eastern Daylight Saving Time. You pick another day, the T0 moves. It's just luck of the draw. We might have been doing this at 8 in the morning when we were getting lightning, or we could have been doing it a few hours from now when conditions may have been acceptable. So in the end, we can all look at Isaac Newton and Johannes Kepler for orbital dynamics telling us when do we launch, and that stuck us right in the middle of a period of bad weather. So there's my science lesson for today, Dan and Jesse.
Appreciate that, John. That helps soften the blow of just moving past that T-0 time. But for anybody, if you're just now tuning in, wondering why Falcon 9 is still sitting there on the pad as we move past that T0, we did have a scrub for weather today, just not able to clear all of those constraints. We keep a very close eye on the weather around the pad and their whole way
Dragon
uphill.
SpaceX for weather.
Right now, Bob and Doug are still inside of Dragon.
Go ahead for weather.
Yeah, I just wanted to give you some more words on the scrub rationale. Yeah, so we basically scrubbed due to 3 rules that we were violating. All 3 would have been expected to clear 10 minutes after our T0 time. And those 3 were natural lightning, the field mills, and the attached anvil.
Yeah, we copy, Jay. We appreciate that update. We could see some raindrops on the windows and just figured that whatever it was too close to the launch pad at the time we needed it not to be. So we appreciate that. Understand that everybody's probably a little bit bummed out. It's just part of the deal. Everybody was ready today, and we appreciate that. And the ship was great. And we'll do it again, I think, on Saturday.
Copy all. And yeah, we concur. And appreciate your resilience sitting there in the vehicle for us.
We got the easy job. Nothing better than being prime crew on a new spaceship.
Copy that.
All right, some great words from Bob and Doug. They're feeling good inside Dragon. They'll be ready to go when we make our next attempt on Saturday. Right now, we're just still waiting for all of the fuel to come off the Falcon 9 rocket. After
Stage 1
that,
LOX and fuel roughly 20%, and Stage 2 fuel 36%.
and so that call right there, we're still at a little over 20% on fuel, RP1, and LOX, liquid oxygen on the first stage, and then at about 26% on RP1 on that second stage. So again, it takes about 40 minutes once the process starts, so we should have right around 30 minutes or so until all that fuel's off. And then the crew will get to go to disarm the launch escape system. We'll see that crew access arm swing back into place, and they can begin to egress or get out of the Dragon spacecraft.
And you heard it live, that weather update of what we violated. We were just 10 minutes off, unfortunately, but again, today was an instantaneous launch. And as John explained, it's due to the orbital mechanics and making sure that at the time we launch, it will allow us to get to the space station on time and accurately. So you can see on your right screen, Bob and Doug are patiently waiting. They do still have their visors on and still strapped into their seats. The launch escape system is still armed right now as we are offloading fuel, and will not disarm until prop offload is complete. And this is just to ensure the safety of Bob and Doug and make sure that they can egress safely from the rocket.
And just a reminder, today, just this first attempt, we're going to be right back here looking like on Saturday for attempt number 2. Launch America is not going anywhere. still on the track to get Bob and Doug into space, and get this Crew Dragon up to the International Space Station. So it's always good, if you're going to scrub, probably rather scrub for weather than an issue on either Falcon 9 or Dragon. And we weren't tracking any issues with the flight systems throughout our countdown today. Everything passed with leak checks on the hatches and the crew suits. All the communications working great. All the teams were ready to go. So, as John and I said, always nice to have a little bit more practice, and we'll be right back at it on Saturday.
What would this launch be if it wasn't even more exciting to try and launch today, and now we have to push it to Saturdays?
Really got to build the suspense.
Yes. So.
Hey, Dan and Jesse. Another thought crossed my mind while I'm watching the diagram here showing fuel is just about off. First and second stage, we're down under 10%. LOX is also just about off of first stage.
10%.
Yep, we're getting the announcement.
Stage 2 fuel's roughly 20%.
Stage 2 fuel's at 20%. Stage 1 LOX is under 10%. So just continuing to come off of the vehicle as expected. On the monitor, Bob and Doug continue with visors down. Their launch escape system is armed, as we've mentioned. If there is anything that were happen to go wrong right now, they still have the viable pad abort means, something that we demonstrated way back in 2015 on one of these webcasts when we fired the Dragon capsule using the 8 Super Dracos off of the launch pad, and it splashed down offshore in the Atlantic Ocean. So they're staying there with the system armed until all the hazards are essentially removed and we bring the crew access arm around them. We're standing by a minute. We're going to listen to Launch Director talking to the weather officer.
If you're just now tuning in, we did not launch today. We did have a scrub because of weather, but as we were saying, we are looking forward to trying this again on Saturday. Our launch time on Saturday will be another instantaneous window, so we'll have to have the weather cooperate again. And that launch time will be at 3:22 p.m. Eastern. I think our last weather update put us at about 40% probability of violation. John, I can check me real quick.
Yeah, Dan, what I saw coming out of the Air Force was 40% probability of violation, I believe. It's always tough because they report in terms of violation, and the optimists have to subtract that from 100% to go, hey, 60% chance, I'll plan my picnic. We were listening, the SpaceX launch director, Mike Taylor, was talking to the launch weather officer asking about the 3 criteria that scrubbed us today. It sounds like in another minute or two, the lightning and the attached anvil cloud rules will clear. The field mill rule, charge in the atmosphere, is still bouncing around, and so, hey, we may need several more minutes before that one would clear. So we'd need even longer than 10 minutes in the window today, it looks like, for all the rules to clear. That brings up what I wanted to mention a little while ago. I got lost listening to the weather brief, but there are a lot of folks who are going, why an instantaneous launch window for Falcon 9 and Dragon? Now, typically when we go to the space station, when we do the mission planning, it's an instantaneous window. There may be enough performance in the rocket to launch somewhere in a 5-minute period, but you've got to pick a time in there. But in the case of Falcon 9, once we start propellant load at T-minus 35 minutes, it doesn't matter so much if you can move 5 or 10 minutes left or right, because the whole sequence is scripted. We do the flight analysis assuming that the temperatures of the propellants are below a certain amount so that we know how much performance is available to the rocket, how much margin we're going to have. So essentially, if you start the countdown, 4 hours, 8 hours out like we were doing today, and you have a very short window, once you get into propellant loading at T-minus 35 minutes, you have to go as soon as you get to 0. We don't have the ability to stop the countdown, wait 5 minutes. Now all of a sudden the liquid oxygen starts warming up from 340 degrees below 0 in the ground system, and that changes how much performance you get carrying into orbit, and we don't want to cut into those margins. Now, if we had had something like a 4-hour window, which some communication satellites have, we could actually get down to almost 0, hold the count, detank the Falcon 9, wait a while, it takes us about an hour and a half, reload a whole new batch of cold liquid oxygen and fuel from the big storage tank that we've got there at Pad 39A, and try to launch again. But in that case, you have to be able to launch, about an hour and a half or so later after you scrub. And in the case of the International Space Station, an hour and a half from now, it's nowhere near where we need to be to get to orbit with the performance of the Falcon 9 and the Dragon. So today, it's a combination. We start the day with a 1-second window.
Yeah, just informing you, it's
but once we get inside of 35 minutes, it becomes an instantaneous window for the Falcon 9, regardless of what the customer may be able to give us. So there's a little explanation for folks who are wondering why we have such a tight window. Right now, it looks like we are bringing the last bits of fuel off of the stage, and liquid oxygen is just about off of the stage. So things are clocking right along per the 40-minute timeline. Everything looks good, and we'll wait to hear that we're clear, and then when we get the call for Bob and Doug to go ahead and disarm launch escape system, and the crew access arm will watch come back out, center itself around the Dragon hatch, and then the ingress team will go up there and open the hatch.
Thank you for the science lesson, John I.
Hey, no charge.
Much appreciated.
We did hear a quick call to the crew there. We should be just under 10 minutes away from that prop offload completing. It looks like we're just tracking
Stage 2
the
fuel
RP1
offload is complete.
And there we have the confirmation. Stage 2 offload's complete. And we should have now just the RP1, so that densified propellant, or the RP1 is kerosene. We should be under 10%, a little under 10 minutes until that's off. And then we'll step through those events we were discussing, where they'll be able to disarm the launch escape system, get the arm back out there, and Bob and Doug can begin to exit the Dragon spacecraft. Still not the friendliest skies in the background.
That is Florida, though. The weather is constantly changing over there, which is why we always have to keep an eye on it through every single launch that we have out there. And Bob and Doug are patiently waiting. As you can see, that is a live view of them on the Crew Dragon vehicle as they're waiting prop offload to complete. Second stage prop offload is complete. We are just waiting on first stage to complete.
Stage 1 box offload is complete. Waiting on stage 1 fuel in roughly 5 minutes or so.
And again, the launch escape system is still armed. We are waiting for a prop offload to complete before they disarm that, and then they will be able to egress from the Crew Dragon vehicle.
And we just heard we should be just under 5 minutes away from the last of that fuel coming out of the Falcon 9 first stage, and then we'll see those events start to pick back up, and we'll see the crew arm swing back out. They've been in those seats for a couple hours now. They typically get inside of Dragon a little over 2.5 hours ahead of launch, so they've been strapped into these seats for quite a while. They are custom sized though, so they're as comfortable and as snug as possible, obviously, since they're going to be in them for a really long time. But most importantly, when you're doing that splashdown at the very end of the mission, it's your car seat, and splashing down or landing on land is not the most gentle of procedures in a capsule. So just really making sure that they're snug inside of that Dragon capsule. But we should be a little under 5 minutes away from the prop offload being completed.
And as Dan mentioned, those suits are custom made, but the seats are also custom fit for each astronaut as well. They do remain on Crew Dragon for this mission for almost 24 hours about, so we do want to make sure that they are comfortable and make sure that the suits and the seats are comfortable enough for them to stay in that position for a while. I believe when they get into orbit, they are allowed to get out of their seats and get a little bit more comfortable, but it's a long ride for them.
Yeah, once they do get on orbit, they are able to get out of the seats and actually out of their suits too, since for this flight path today, it was going to take them about 19 hours. So Bob and Doug would actually have had about 8 hours to sleep on board the Dragon capsule. So we weren't able to launch today, though. The rendezvous on Saturday should be very similar to what we would have had if we launched today, where it'll take them about 19 hours to get to the International Space Station. So they'll launch, and they'll have a number of different events that we'll be able to walk you through, including manual piloting of Dragon and just really putting the spacecraft through all of the paces before it arrives at the International Space Station. Because, again, this is a test flight. And this is this last test before we certify the Dragon spacecraft for regular crewed flights, which will just be bringing up those long duration, 6-month, maybe even a year-long missions.
Right. And it should be a very exciting test flight because it's pretty much like an actual mission. When Bob and Doug get on the station, they will be performing some research while they're up there and performing tests and doing some final things for this demonstration mission.
Yeah, but I mean, just for right now, we are just going to continue to stay with them until we see them come out of Dragon, because the launch escape system's still armed while we wait for this propellant offload to complete. That's just done as a safety measure. Anytime you have rocket propellants beneath you, you want to make sure that we have a good way for them to get out of the way. And so we should be within just a couple of minutes for that final bit of RP1 coming off the first stage, and then we'll hear the crew get the go to disarm that launch escape system. We'll see the crew access arm swing back in. But if you're just tuning in, expecting them to be in space, we did have a scrub today due to weather. Our next launch attempt is going to be this Saturday, May 30th at 3:22 p.m. Eastern Time. And just like we did today, we're going to be bringing you every single step of the way. It's going to look a little familiar if you watched all of today's, but it's going to be just as exciting.
I could imagine it might even be more exciting with all the anticipation that we've hyped this launch up for with already going through it all today. But again, the more practice we have, the better off we will be. Hopefully next launch attempt we will have a flawless launch. and actually be able to lift off with good weather.
Yeah, weather is going to be the big thing that we'll continue to watch. That was the culprit today for our scrub. And our initial weather reports already looking at about a 40% possibility of violation, probability of violation. So as John and I was saying, the optimists in us have to say that's 60% good. So we're gonna look at the good side of this, and that's roughly what we were in the days leading up to this. We won't have a rogue tropical storm forming off of South Carolina on us on Saturday, but Florida weather will always be dynamic, so we'll just continue to track and hopefully get a good chance hit that window on Saturday.
And just a reminder, everything else on the vehicle and for the mission was looking good today. It was just the weather, which, as John I has said earlier, and Lauren even referred to him mentioning this, weather is the one thing that we actually cannot control on our missions. So unfortunately, it did cause us to scrub today, but the vehicles are healthy. Bob and Doug were ready. And they should be ready to go again with the next launch attempt on Saturday.
Just looking at our data, it looks like that RP1 is just about all out. So we'll just kind of stand by for a few more moments. Hopefully we get that call soon, John I.
Yeah, I was going to, while we're waiting to hear the call, that the last percentage of fuel is off. I was going to comment on Jesse's discussion about it was just the weather. I think during this countdown, there were more words said about the weather than everything else. I'm listening right now to a weather discussion in the background.
Yeah, and again, for people wondering if we knew that we did have bad weather, even from this morning, again, we do monitor this all the way down to the final minutes of the countdown. And with Florida weather being pretty sporadic, sometimes we have even hurricanes coming through or bad weather coming through and passing 20 minutes later and having good weather for a launch. So this is why we continued to attempt to launch today, but unfortunately 4T0 today, weather was not on our side.
Yeah, and Jesse, this is John again. I dropped off to listen to a weather discussion. They were just giving the times. The lightning rule went green, so we could have gone without a lightning concern. The attached anvil rule cleared, but the field mill rule is expected to clear at 58 minutes after the hour. So that's another 4.5 minutes from now. So we were close, but we needed about 25 minutes later launch time. It does remind me, at risk of offending some people, but the old saying that says it's better to be on the ground wishing you were flying than flying wishing you were on the ground.
Yes, definitely. Safety first, always, and making sure that when Bob and Doug do fly, they are flying safely and as planned. So again, this is standard procedure for us to make sure that they do have a safe flight to the International Space Station.
All right, well, for now, we're just continuing to stand by, expecting the call that all of that prop has now been offloaded from Falcon 9.
All right, venting vehicle tanks to nominal TPC set points for crew ingress.
At this moment, the launch escape system is still armed. Once the prop offload is complete, that'll be the next step in our procedures to have Bob and Doug begin to make their way out of Dragon.
LD, countdown 1.
LD.
We have the prompt here for nominal crew egress.
Okay, so we're ready for launch escape system disarm.
As affirmed, ready for launch escape disarm.
MD copies. You guys are ready?
Yeah, launch team's ready. Go ahead and advise the crew.
Okay, Dragon SpaceX, you copy that discussion. So with that, you are go for disarming launch escape system per section 2 of 5.100.
We'll put that in work. Section 2, disarming the launch escape system.
All right, that was the call we were waiting for, propelling off of Falcon 9. So Doug Hurley, Bob Ankin now going to disarm the launch escape system on Dragon. And once that's disarmed, those 8 Super Draco engines will be out of the mix.
SpaceX Dragon launch escape system has been disarmed into Alpha Decimal 3.
Copy that. We concur.
And showing then confirmed the launch escape system has been disarmed.
And Dragon SpaceX, with that confirmation, you are go to open your visors and proceed to Section 3.
Okay, we'll open the visors and go to Section 3.
As you heard and you can see, Bob and Doug can now open their visors and get ready for exiting the vehicle. Again, they kept their visors on while the launch escape system was armed, while prop offloading was continuing, and that is just to make sure that they are safe. Now that there is no more propellant on any of the vehicles, they are safe to have disarmed the launch escape system and now are getting ready for that crew arm to swing back the hatch to open and for them to egress.
SpaceX Dragon with an update. We're holding in 3.4 and we're ready for seat rotation when you are.
Copy that. We'll wait for the closeout team to open the hatch and verify clearance, and then we can execute seat rotation.
Dragon captain.
And there's that crew arm swinging back towards Dragon. Once that crew arm is in place, they will be able to open the hatch on Crew Dragon. Bob and Doug's seats will rotate back out of launch position so that they can safely get out of their seats and egress the vehicle.
And we heard they'll have what they call nominal egress, so just the normal procedures for getting them out of the capsule. That means the same closeout team that was there to get them in will be able to assist as they come out. They'll arrive and get that hatch open, and then they'll be able to rotate the seats. That'll rotate Bob and Doug pretty much forward, where they'll be in the original position that the seats were configured when they made their way into Dragon. It just gets them a little bit out and under the displays and makes getting in and out of the capsule a little bit easier. They've been in those seats for about 3 hours at this point, so definitely a long day for the crew. As they woke up about 6 hours prior to our T-0, had their breakfast, which we confirmed was steak and eggs, at least for Doug Hurley. And then they proceeded through all of the suit up and the trip to the pad, making their way inside Dragon, where they've been for about the last 3 hours at this point. We were on track for an on-time liftoff right at 4:33 p.m. Eastern Time, but did have to scrub a little under 17 minutes before launch due to weather. So for now, we've offloaded all of the propellant off of Falcon 9. The launch escape system has been disarmed. That crew access arm is back right up next to Dragon, as you can see in that view on the left. Pretty soon we'll see the teams arrive to get the hatch open, get Bob and Doug out, and they'll make their way back to crew quarters and their quarantine. It is important to note that throughout the entire process of them getting into Dragon, suiting up all of those different steps, they maintain that same quarantine that they've been in since for about 2 weeks now, and that is specifically for events like today, where we have to scrub and just go to another day. So we don't want to break that quarantine once we're putting them into that launch vehicle, and that's a standard quarantine that we have for any crew members flying to the International Space Station. The current COVID-19 pandemic obviously puts a little bit of extra pressure and a little bit of an extra spotlight on that, but they're following a lot of the same procedures that we have in place just to keep crew members healthy before they go and spend several months in space in an enclosed environment with just a couple of other people.
Right, and it's a little bit more difficult to get them help on the space station, right? So we want to make sure that when they do head up to the space station, that they are fully healthy. So this, again, is standard procedure, not just because of this pandemic that's going on. This is a standard procedure for astronauts to quarantine prior to heading to the station. And as Dan mentioned, this is a standard procedure to exit the vehicle as well. We did scrub today, but this is not an emergency state. This is standard procedure. This is something that is practiced and rehearsed and made sure that we do follow our standard procedures to make sure that everything is still safe. Bob and Doug exit safely and go back into quarantine and get ready for our next launch attempt.
Looks like they're getting a chance to stretch their legs, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dan, Jesse, I'm monitoring along in the scrub procedure right now. They're getting the goes to get the folks back to the pad, the crew that'll open the hatch. So they have notified the team chief, launch engineering, to return to the pad. As a reminder, around the pad, the Air Force and NASA set up roadblocks to make sure nobody gets into the hazard area. So they will head to the roadblocks, they'll pull them open so that they can drive to the pad. So launch director, I think, is estimating it's still about 15 minutes for the crew to drive all the way down out to 39A, get up the tower, and then begin operations on the hatch. They have confirmed that the purge of the Dragon service section, which is nitrogen during the countdown to avoid an oxygen leak, that is back on air now. The crew access arm is on air, so they're ready for the egress team to get up into the tower. But it's going to take them a little bit still, I think, to drive down the road in the vehicles and go up the elevator. But everything continuing to run per a normal scrub countdown, which we have had the opportunity to practice with the crew in, for example, the dry dress rehearsal last Saturday, after we had done the static fire of the Falcon 9 the day before.
And I've been seeing a few questions, people asking why aren't we just trying to launch tomorrow? As John and I was talking us through, there's some very specific times you have to identify when you're going to be able to link up with the International Space Station. You'll only have so much fuel, which can only generate so much energy to make sure you're going to intersect with the station, which is flying at over 17,000 miles an hour. So you're hitting
Dragon
one bullet
SpaceX
with another
comms.
bullet. Some of our other launch attempts are able to make it to the station, but have much longer
Dragon,
times.
to prevent us from losing comms, we're going to be switching to umbilical at this time. I'm going to be unmerging Countdown 1, but we'll keep you updated here on Dragon Ground.
Okay, yeah, we see the TDRS countdown with a little over 3 minutes. We'll stand by for your next call on umbilical.
Copy.
The crew getting a call, they're just going to reconfigure some communications. But as to why we're not launching, say, tomorrow...
And core and Countdown 1 loops are merged.
But when we pick our launch attempts, we also have to take in mind some of the human factors of these attempts. Some of these other launch attempts may exist, but it would require Dragon taking in excess of 30 or more hours potentially to reach the station, which could wreak some havoc with the sleep shifts cycles, not only for Bob and Doug, but also for the crew on board station that has to line up their sleep schedule with Bob and Doug as they arrive. And the crews on station and Bob and Doug will be operating off of Greenwich Mean Time once they get there.
Dragon SpaceX, comm check umbilical.
SpaceX Dragon, loud and clear on umbilical.
Copy, have you the same.
Still getting good comm between the crew and the core here in Hawthorne. But really, just to sum it up, we pick our launch attempts for a number of reasons, not just can we make it to the station, but just how long is it going to take to get there. And that's why Saturday is going to be our best option. We're going to be targeting that one at 3:22 p.m. Eastern Time for our next attempt. And it'll be a little over 19, maybe a little over 20 hours until we actually arrive at the space station, if we're able to get off the ground on Saturday.
Right, And this gives Bob and Doug, a few days to kind of shake off the nerves from today's launch attempt, give them some more time to rest, and again, get ready for our launch attempt on Saturday. And if you're just now joining us, we did scrub our Demonstration 2 mission today. And as John mentioned, we are waiting for the egress team to make it back to the launch pad, head up the tower, and help the crew, or help Bob and Doug egress the vehicle.
Dragon SpaceX for closeout team status.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the closeout team has arrived at the pad and they are proceeding to the White Room.
Copy that.
You heard that call out. The egress team is at the pad and are proceeding to meet Bob and Doug in the White Room, where they can open the hatch and help them exit the vehicle.
Yep, and we'll continue to stick with Bob and Doug until we see that hatch get open and them start to make their way out. And then they're going to, and there we can get some views once more back at the pad. You can see that egress team moving back in. They were wearing the black clean suits that we saw as they were helping Bob and Doug get into the Dragon just several hours ago. They're now going to get on the elevator, make their way back up, down the crew access arm, and then we'll get that Dragon side hatch opened.
And as we saw earlier, this is a very tall structure, but that elevator is pretty quick there. So we saw them enter the bottom of the tower. It should be a very short time before they make it to the top and are able to get to the White Room and open the hatch for Bob and Doug.
If you want.
And should just be a few more moments. We'll see that closeout team make their way back into the crew access arm and down the hatchway. And again, if you are just now tuning in, we did have that scrub just about a little under 17 minutes before launch. Our next launch attempt is going to be this Saturday, May 30th. At launch time, it's going to be another instantaneous launch time. It's going to be 3:22 p.m. Eastern time over there in Florida. And assuming an on-time launch, it'll be a pretty similar flight that we were looking at today, where it'll be roughly about 19 hours before they make that initial contact to the International Space Station. They'll get on orbit and execute a series of 5 different burns to gradually raise their orbit until they're just a few hundred meters below the station and maybe a few kilometers behind. And then they'll do all of the final approach initiation maneuvers. And by that point, the team here in Hawthorne will be working very closely with the team down in Houston in the International Space Station Flight Control Room. Weather for Saturday still not ideal, but it's roughly what we started out with today, where we have about a 40% chance, possibility of violation and it'll be tracking a lot of the same issues with cumulus clouds and potential precipitation. We'll also be keeping an eye on all of the downrange weather. Oh, it looks like we're seeing some people start to make their way into the crew access arm now, so we should see them get that Dragon